My name is Audrey Marshall. I'm 26, and last weekend I learned exactly where I stand in my own family. I spent hours running my sister's housewarming. I hauled folding chairs in from the garage, rearranged the backyard so it looked like a magazine spread, checked the appetizers in the oven, and kept the trash from overflowing while she floated around greeting people like she was hosting a reality show. By the time the last car pulled up, I was sweating through my shirt, and she hadn't lifted more than a finger. When it was finally time for gifts, she made a big show of every candle and cutting board like it was life-changing. When she opened my envelope and saw the gift card for $500, she barely reacted, just slid it aside like it was a receipt. Then she started talking about the family lunch she had planned for the next day. Everyone around her was nodding like they were in on something. I waited for her to include me. She didn't. When I quietly asked what time we were all meeting, she looked straight at me and said, I wasn't we. I was just the help. The room laughed. Some people meant it. Some people were just following the noise. But no one pushed back. I felt my face burn, swallowed it, and smiled anyway. I told her calmly that the house she was showing off so hard would not belong to her for very long. Before I tell you what she said and what happened after I walked out, tell me, what time is it for you right now and where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. A couple of days before the party, the first warning sign showed up on my phone. The invitation wasn't from my sister at all. It was a screenshot from my mom, Joyce Marshall, forwarding a message from some group thread I wasn't in. No, hey Audrey, I'd love for you to be there. No personal note, just an address and a time. It looked more like a flyer than something sent to a daughter. I stared at it, wondering when I had turned into an afterthought in my own family. My older sister, Mallory Marshall, has always needed everything to look perfect as long as someone else is doing the work. When we were kids, she arrived late to birthdays while I set tables and rinsed dishes. Our mom would say, "You know how your sister is," like that explained why I was the one scraping plates at 10 o'clock. We grew up, but the assignments never changed. By the time Saturday rolled around, I already knew how the day would go. My boyfriend Evan Russo drove us across Columbus toward Mallory's new neighborhood, all manicured lawns and matching mailboxes. The house itself was small, a two-bedroom with a strip of grass behind it, but Mallory loved how it photographed. It was the kind of place you could make look expensive if you stayed close to certain angles. The ironic part was that it wasn't really her house. The mortgage and the paperwork were under my aunt, Lillian Marshall, because Mallory's credit wasn't where it needed to be yet. Lillian had agreed to put everything on her name on the condition that Mallory kept up the payments, followed the neighborhood rules, and treated the place like a responsibility, not a prop. Mallory still introduced it as my house to anyone who would listen. We pulled up almost an hour before the time on the invite. Mom had texted that morning asking if I could come a little early to help your sister, like that wasn't already assumed. Evan asked if I was sure I wanted to be there. I said yes, because saying no would have turned into another call about how I was making things harder for everyone. Mallory opened the front door before I could knock. She was already in her party dress, hair curled, makeup finished, bare feet slapping against the hardwood. Behind her, the living room looked staged for photos, but the kitchen was a maze of half-opened grocery bags, sticky counters, and empty packaging. She glanced at me, then at the trunk of Evan's car, calculating how much labor she'd just gained. She did not ask how I was. She did not ask about my job or whether Evan wanted anything. She just started assigning tasks. Folding chairs from the garage, a spare cooler from the basement, plastic cutlery unwrapped and sorted into jars she had bought online. Evan ended up with a roll of trash bags and a vague instruction about the backyard can. I started moving without thinking, muscles falling into the same pattern my brain was tired of. The house sat near the end of a quiet street, and people in that kind of neighborhood notice everything. While I was maneuvering chairs through the hallway, I saw a man on the sidewalk pause to look at the line of cars already hugging the curb. Later, I would learn his name was Jeff Orton. the kind of neighbor who remembers which houses push the rules. In that moment, he was just another set of eyes on the driveway. Inside, Mallory fussed over throw blankets and the angle of the snack table, more focused on what would end up online than whether there was space to walk. I wiped up a spill on the counter and noticed a stack of unopened letters addressed to Lillian, not Mallory, shoved halfway under a fruit bowl. It was a small reminder that my sister was performing ownership on a stage built with someone else's name. Mom arrived with a casserole and a bright, tight smile. She kissed my cheek in passing and went straight into praising Mallory for how grown up the place looked. Evan and I kept trading glances over the folding table as I unfolded napkins and he tied off trash bags. More cars crawled down the street, guests stepping out with gift bags swinging from their hands, ringing the bell like the show was about to start. The official start time came and went while I was still in motion. The music crept up another notch. Ice hit the sink in heavy drops, and I found myself wedged between the back door and a stack of flattened cardboard boxes no one else seemed to see. From the sidewalk, it probably looked like my sister had pulled off a flawless event. From the inside, it already felt like I had been hired for a job I was not getting paid for. By late afternoon, the house felt heavier, like the air itself was bracing for a crowd. Music pushed through the open windows while the front door opened and closed in uneven bursts, and I moved between the kitchen and the backyard in a loop that never stopped. Shoes collected by the entryway, jackets landed wherever there was a spare hook, and voices overlapped until the whole place buzzed. Mallory drifted from group to group with a drink in her hand, laughing a little louder every time someone held up a phone. The first guests were people from her office. They arrived in polished cars carrying gift bags with tissue paper blooming out of the top. I recognized a few faces from posts she had tagged, the ones where she talked about building a life. They told her the house was adorable, the neighborhood was perfect, the light was flattering. Mallory absorbed every word, nodding as if she had picked out every board and fixture. While they talked, I kept my hands busy. I refilled the ice bucket before it went empty, shifted platters so the nicest ones stayed in front, and tried to keep the counters from turning into a stack of used cups. Evan stayed close to the back door, tying off trash bags and hauling them out to the can behind the fence. He barely spoke, but each time our eyes met, I saw the same mix of irritation and resignation. The second wave came from Bryce Hamilton's side. I heard his voice before he reached the porch, smooth and controlled, the kind of tone that belonged in conference rooms. He stepped into the hallway with the easy confidence of someone used to being listened to. A woman in a structured blazer walked just behind him, her posture straight, eyes taking in the room with quick, efficient sweeps. That was Donna Hamilton. Mallory's whole body sharpened when she saw them. Her shoulders went back, her grin widened, and even her gestures changed, slower and more deliberate, as if she was suddenly aware of being evaluated. She guided Bryce and Donna through the living room and out toward the yard, pointing out the kitchen island, the sliding doors, the strip of grass, like she was hosting a private showing. I stayed a few steps behind, collecting empty cups and balancing them on a tray, close enough to hear, far enough that no one would think I belonged in the conversation. When Bryce said the place was a smart move for someone our age, Mallory replied that it had taken a lot of effort, but she had always been determined to own something early. Donna listened without interrupting. If anyone noticed, I was the one lifting, wiping, and fetching things. They kept that to themselves. Donna's gaze slid over me once as I wiped down the edge of the counter, lingering for half a second before she turned back to Mallory. I could not tell if she was impressed, suspicious, or simply cataloging details. As more people arrived, the backyard shrank. Folding chairs filled the grass, paper plates gathered on every flat surface, and the music crept up another notch. From the outside, it probably looked like a glossy lifestyle post brought to life. From my spot near the kitchen doorway, it looked like a party held together by whoever cared whether the trash made it into the bag. Inside, the sink filled with glasses. Cutlery disappeared into random corners, and a sticky ring formed under the punch bowl. I moved on autopilot, shifting trays, pulling wiped dishes out of the way, fishing a serving spoon out of a nearly full trash bag before anyone piled more on top. Evan brushed past me with another tied bag, his shoulder bumping mine in a small, wordless check-in. Mallory slipped back into the kitchen long enough to nudge a candle and glance at the dessert trays. She reminded me that she wanted them on the table just before she started opening presents, because someone was going to record the whole thing and she wanted everything in the frame. She did not ask whether I needed a break or whether I wanted to sit with anyone. By early evening, the living room pulled people in. Someone lowered the lights until the room looked softer, warmer, more forgiving on camera. Conversations dimmed into a low hum as guests shifted onto the couch and clustered around the coffee table, all eyes angling toward the spot where Mallory stood. She took that position without hesitation, smoothed the front of her dress, and reached for the first gift bag, waiting at the center. I stayed near the doorway, sleeves rolled up, watching from the edge while everyone else settled into their seats. The living room had been rearranged into a small stage without anyone saying it out loud. Mallory stood at the center, framed by the coffee table and a curve of guests balancing plates on their knees. Someone lowered the music to a soft hum. A phone hovered upright, already recording. I stayed near the doorway, close enough to be useful, far enough that no one had saved me a seat. She opened the first gifts like she was filming an ad. Each candle and throw pillow earned a neat reaction, a line about how perfect it was. Laughter rose on cue. People glanced at each other, then back at her, measuring themselves against her performance. She had always controlled a room by turning it into a mirror. My envelope sat buried near the back of the pile, half hidden under a glossy bag. I recognized my handwriting, the way I had tried to make it look tidy during a rushed break at work. I had spent weeks setting money aside so that inside would be a gift card worth $500, something that could pay for a bill or a repair instead of another decorative piece. When Mallory reached it, she did not slow down. She tore the flap, pulled the card partway out, and glanced only long enough to see the store name. There was no pause, no question, no curiosity about what was inside. She called it useful, the same way you would describe printer paper, then let it drop onto the table along with the torn envelope. A few guests nodded, already moving on. Heat rose in my chest. My gift had landed, been acknowledged in the most minimal way possible, and cleared off the emotional checklist. I saw Evan near the side table shifting an empty bottle out of the way. He did not speak, but the look he sent me across the room said enough. The pile of wrapping paper shrank. Once the last box was opened, Mallory kept talking. She slid into a small speech about her plans for the house, how settled she felt, how this place was the start of everything she wanted. Then she mentioned a lunch the next day, a small thing for family, folded into her words as if it were obvious who counted. People around her leaned in, asking about the menu and what time they should come by. She fielded each question, smiling, gesturing toward the kitchen as if she had arranged every detail herself. She never once turned toward the doorway. I waited for my name to appear, for even the smallest sign that she expected me there. I had spent the afternoon hauling, sorting, and adjusting, filling every gap that would have shown through the image she was building. Instead of feeling closer to the center, I felt myself being nudged further out to the edge. When I finally spoke, my voice sounded ordinary to my own ears. I asked what time lunch would be so I could plan the rest of my weekend. On the surface, it was just another logistical question. Underneath, it was a quiet assumption that I was standing on the same level as everyone else. Mallory's reaction made it clear that I was not. She pivoted toward me with the same polished smile she had used all evening. Her answer came out quick and light, wrapped in humor sharp enough to sting. She took my question and turned it into a line about who counted and who did not, spelling out in front of coworkers, in-laws, and relatives that I belonged with the people who took out the trash, not with the ones sitting on the couch. Laughter broke open around her. It was brighter, rougher, and it pushed against my skin like heat from too close to a stove. Some guests laughed because the room told them to, some because it was easier than standing out, some because they had only caught the tone and not the content. What cut deepest was not the joke itself, but the blank space where any objection could have been. My mom sat on the edge of an armchair, fingers around a glass that had more ice than drink left in it. Her eyes moved between us once, then dropped. Evan's mouth set in a thin line. Bryce's expression faltered before he smoothed it over. Donna watched without reacting, as if she were filing away a detail for later. I did not raise my voice. I did not ask her to explain herself. I shifted my weight until both feet felt solid on the rug and let the moment sink in. Something quiet and stubborn settled in my chest, a line that felt different from all the ones my sister had drawn before. The next minutes blurred together. Glasses clinked, small talk swirled past my shoulders, and the music rose again. I collected plates that were only half empty and stacked them in my hands. My body finished the work it had started that afternoon. My mind finally stepped out of the role my sister had written for me. That night, the first thing I saw was not my own reflection, but my sister's party on a screen. Back at our apartment, the air felt almost too still after the noise at her house. Evan dropped his keys in the bowl by the door and went to pour water. I sat on the couch, still in the clothes I had been working in all afternoon, and lifted my phone because not looking at it felt worse than whatever might be there. Mallory had already posted a neat carousel of photos. The living room shot was angled so you could not see the pile of cups in the sink or the recycling leaning against the pantry door. The backyard looked like a postcard, the folding chairs arranged just right, the string lights hiding the bags of trash along the fence. Her caption thanked everyone for celebrating with family. My name was nowhere in the tags. The guests had started sharing their own angles, a boomerang of glasses raised, a selfie on the couch, a group shot in front of the sliding doors. In picture after picture, the house looked effortless, like it came that way out of the box. I knew I had been in the doorway in at least 2 of those frames. Whoever edited them had pushed me cleanly out. The family group chat woke up not long after. Messages stacked on top of each other about how beautiful everything was, how proud they were of Mallory, how lucky she was to have such a nice place. Emojis filled in the space where details should have gone. No one mentioned that I had left early. No one asked why. A separate notification slid in from my mother. She did not ask if I was okay. She asked me to keep the peace. She wrote that my sister had been trying so hard to impress Bryce's family that sometimes remarks came out wrong, that it would only inflame things if I held on to it. It read less like concern and more like instructions for how to make everyone else comfortable. Old reflexes sparked. I could already hear myself replying that it was fine, that I understood, that we could pretend the whole thing had been a joke. I had sent versions of that message my entire life. It was how I had ended up fixing chairs and wiping tables while someone else collected the credit. I set the phone face down on the coffee table and leaned back until my shoulders touched the cushions. The quiet of our place settled around me like a different kind of noise, one I actually had control over. Evan sat on the arm of the couch, close enough that his knee brushed my arm. He did not tell me I was overreacting. He did not tell me to calm down. He simply stayed where he was, hands loosely folded, waiting to see what I would choose. Under the embarrassment and anger, there was a practical fact I could not ignore. The house Mallory was branding as hers did not sit on Mallory's signature. It sat on my Aunt Lillian's. Her name was on the mortgage, on the insurance, on the mail I had seen half hidden under a fruit bowl. She was the one who had agreed to carry the weight of the loan as long as my sister respected the property and the neighborhood. If anyone in our family had the right to know how that agreement was being handled, it was her. I thought about the way Lillian spoke at holidays. How she asked pointed questions and listened all the way through the answer. She never raised her voice. She never let a problem grow because everyone was too polite to describe it. If there was a rule, she expected it to be followed. If there was a risk, she wanted to see it before it landed on her desk. The idea of calling her made my stomach twist. I did not want to sound petty, like I was tattling because my feelings were hurt. I did not want to give Mallory ammunition to say I had tried to sabotage her. I kept asking myself whether telling the full truth about the party was actually different from revenge, or if I was just hoping it would feel that way. By morning, the group chat had moved on to the lunch my sister had mentioned. A stream of messages talked about casseroles, side dishes, and who was bringing dessert. I scrolled through the names. Every person who had laughed the night before seemed to have a place set for them. There was no gap left open in the head count. Sunlight hit the kitchen counter in a narrow strip. I stood there, eating toast while Evan made coffee, and for a moment, the picture of my life shrank down to our small sink, our 2 plates, our 1 pan from dinner. It took less than a minute to wash everything and wipe the counter dry. Nothing about it required me to be anything but myself. When the dishes were stacked, I picked up my phone again and scrolled to Lillian's name. It sat near the top of my recent calls, surrounded by holidays and logistics, not arguments. My thumb hovered for a beat. Then I pressed it. Her voice came through on the second ring, calm and alert. I told her I was sorry to bother her on a weekend and that there was something about the house she needed to hear. I kept my tone flat to keep it from breaking. I described how many people had been there, how the cars had lined to the curb, how the trash had started spilling out before the night was over. I mentioned that a neighbor had lingered on the sidewalk, watching the drive the way people do when they are close to filing a complaint. I left my sister's words about me out of it. I focused on the parts that involved Lillian's name and credit, the property, the rules, the unopened envelopes addressed to her that I had seen tucked under a bowl in the kitchen. I told her I was worried. The house was being treated like a backdrop instead of a commitment. Lillian did not rush to respond. I heard the faint scratch of a pen and the sound of her breathing. She asked a few specific questions about times and about how often parties like that were happening. I answered each one as clearly as I could, resisting the urge to add excuses or soften what I had already said. When she thanked me for calling, her voice stayed even. She said she would handle it and that I did not need to step in again. After we hung up, my fingers stayed curled around the phone for a long moment. I set it down next to my coffee, watched the screen go dark, and let the quiet fill the room. By afternoon, the decision to call Lillian was no longer just a thought sitting between my coffee cup and my phone. She did what she always did when something carried her name. She went to see it herself. I did not ride along and did not offer to meet her there. The point of calling had been to hand the responsibility back to the person who actually had it. Still, when my phone buzzed with a photo from her a few hours later, my chest tightened. The picture was of Mallory's kitchen. The counters were crowded with plates that never made it into the sink. A streak of something dark ran down the cabinet door under the island. The trash can in the corner had its lid propped open with a takeout container. A ring of spills dried around the floor. In the corner of the frame, I could see the edge of a letter with Lillian's name across the top. No caption came with the photo. The silence said enough. Another message followed. This one, a screenshot of an email from the Homeowners Association. It mentioned noise after quiet hours, cars blocking part of the sidewalk, and trash bags left out without lids. The email closed by reminding the owner on record that repeated violations could result in fines. Mallory had told everyone, including Bryce's family, that she owned the house. The Homeowners Association had reminded the only person who actually mattered in that equation that she did not. Later, Lillian called. She spoke in the same even tone I had heard my whole life when she was sorting facts instead of feelings. She asked a few more questions about the party, then told me I had been right to let her know. She did not ask how my sister had spoken to me, and I did not volunteer it. There are some parts of what happened that only exist between Mallory and me, and I was not ready to hand those over yet. She said she was going to give Mallory one clear chance to fix what she had broken. The conditions were simple: clean the house properly, handle the association warning, show she understood that the mortgage and credit attached to the property were not toys. If Mallory could not manage that, Lillian would end the arrangement and move on. I almost told her that my sister rarely did anything until the last possible second. Instead, I said that I trusted her judgment and thanked her for listening. When the call ended, I set my phone down and tried to let the matter live where it belonged, outside my apartment and outside my hands. The group chat kept buzzing through the day with photos from the lunch I had not been invited to. Platters of food, arms looped around shoulders, the same living room arranged now for a smaller, cozier audience. From the camera angles, it was impossible to tell whether the counters had been wiped or the trash had been taken out. It did not matter. The association's email and Lillian's visit had already seen what needed to be seen. Mallory's messages started that evening. At first, they were short and sharp, asking what I had said, demanding to know why Lillian had suddenly turned on her. She insisted there must have been some misunderstanding, that someone had exaggerated. Each text stacked over the last, building a wall of accusations I did not feel like climbing. I did not answer. I had promised Lillian I would stay out of the middle, and I was tired of holding the rope in a tug-of-war no one admitted we were playing. The tone shifted after a few hours. The new messages were longer, less certain. Mallory wrote about how stressful it had been to move, how much pressure she felt to prove herself, how embarrassed she was that there had been any complaint at all. She circled the subject without naming it, never quite writing the words, "I lied," or "I treated you like you did not count." Evan glanced at my screen once and asked whether I wanted him to block her number for a while. I shook my head. Blocking felt too final for that moment. I thought that if I left the thread alone, the storm inside it might burn itself out without blowing the door off its hinges. By the time I went to bed, the notifications had slowed, but not stopped. Mallory kept talking into the space I had left empty, trying new angles, new explanations. It was the same pattern I had seen my entire life, just written out in blue and gray bubbles instead of spoken in hallways and backyards. The difference this time was that I had finally stepped out of the script. 2 days later, the consequences stopped living on my screen and showed up at my door. I was folding laundry when the first knock landed, heavy and impatient. Evan looked over from the kitchen and waited. Another round followed, harder, rattling the frame. I did not need the peephole to know it was my sister. Mallory's voice came through the wood tight with anger. She wanted to talk, to clear things up, to know why I had tried to ruin her life. The phrases tumbled over each other in a rhythm I knew too well. When silence met her, she shifted into pleading, reminding me we were sisters and that families did not turn on each other over one night. In her version of family, everyone else absorbed the fallout while she protected the image. I stayed on the couch, hands smoothing a seam that was already flat. Evan walked to the door and, without opening it, said, "We are not having this conversation today." His tone stayed even. The knocking continued for a few more beats. Then a dull thud hit the frame and footsteps retreated down the hall. The quiet afterward felt dense rather than calm. Nothing was settled. It was only no longer happening on my side of the door. My mother called that evening. Her voice carried the worn-out edge of someone bracing for a storm. She said Mallory was devastated, that she had been blindsided by Lillian, that she did not understand why I had gone behind her back. Disappointment rolled out of her in practice lines, as if it were weather no one could change. She laid out the case for another chance. Mallory had been under pressure from Bryce's family. People said things they did not mean. It would be tragic, she said, if one night undid everything my sister had built. Each sentence leaned toward the same destination. I should make it easier for everyone by smoothing the situation over. When she finally paused, I told her I had not lied to anyone. I had not asked Mallory to claim a house that legally belonged to our aunt. I had not told her to call me the help in front of her guests. I had described the condition of a property tied to Lillian's credit, because the person carrying the risk deserved clear information. There was a long stretch of breathing and clinking dishes on the other end. My mother said she was afraid this would break our family. I said pretending nothing was wrong had been splitting it slowly for years. We did not resolve the difference. She ended the call saying she needed time to think. For once, I let the silence stand. The actual break came about a week later, when Lillian told me she was done. She called to inform me not to ask what I thought. Mallory had been given a chance to respond to the association's letter and to clean up the mess. Instead, there were delays, explanations, and another complaint in Lillian's inbox. The pattern was clear. Lillian was terminating the arrangement. She would decide later whether to move in, rent, or sell, but my sister's time in that house was over. Listening, I did not feel triumphant. I felt something more grounded, like a finally balanced equation. The person who had taken the risk was stepping back from someone who treated that risk like a backdrop. Mallory was going to have to find somewhere else to build her version of a perfect life. News traveled the way it always does in families, sideways. Relatives called my mother for the story. Some repeated Mallory's version, where I was jealous and vindictive. Others had been at the party and remembered exactly how she had spoken to me. People picked the angle that made their own reflection easiest to look at. I stopped worrying about which frame they chose. Bryce's side responded in a quieter, sharper way. Without the house as proof of stability, their view of the relationship shifted from the limited details that reached me. Plans paused, then dissolved. The visits became shorter. Invitations stopped, including long-term language. They did not make a scene, they simply stepped away. Mallory's messages kept coming for a while. Some blamed me for taking everything from her. Others tried to draw a line between the way she handled me and the way she handled the house, as if those were separate categories. A few sounded like they had been typed in the dark hours of the night. I read them until I understood that there was nothing new in them, just the same pattern rearranged. Then I muted the thread and left it there. The last time we spoke, the exchange was short and uneven. She said she hoped I was satisfied now. I said I hoped she would eventually learn that people are not furniture in the rooms she wants to show off. It was the clearest truth I could offer without reopening everything. After that, the calls stopped, the knocking stopped, her name slid down my recent contacts and stayed there. My mother and I still talk, but less often, and about safer things. Recipes, weather, small updates. Lillian and I speak when there is paperwork or a holiday, keeping the conversations focused on what can actually be handled. Family gatherings have become smaller and a little awkward, but also strangely calm. There is less shouting and less pretending. I miss the version of a sister I thought I had more than the person she kept showing me. Grieving that difference is quiet work. There is no dramatic finale, just a long series of small choices not to walk back into the same role. What I have now is room. Evenings where my phone stays face down and my shoulders do not creep toward my ears. Favors I can choose instead of obligations I cannot refuse. Visits where I know whether I'm there as family or as a guest, not as unpaid staff. If there is anything worth carrying out of all this, it is the understanding that boundaries do not destroy real relationships. They only reveal which ones depended on you having none. Saying no to being the help did not make me cruel. It just made consequences visible for the first time. If my story made you think about your own, I hope it gives you permission to protect your time, energy, and self-respect, even when the person crossing the line shares your last name. Thank you for listening all the way through. If you want more stories that sit in the messy parts of family and still reach for something healthier, you can stick around, share this with someone who needs it, or simply take the piece that fits and leave the best.